April the 1st, 2024. I'm going to be your host tonight. You can call in at 709-589-4406. I'm going to be your host, Dana Durnford. I hope you had a great day. We got tons and tons of nuclear stories to get through. And so the story tonight is because a lot of people can't comprehend the dangers of nuclear. So this is a really, really special show. And I'm going to give you a couple of hundred studies. I'm just going to flash through it. And you can see all the different facets that they spent millions and millions of dollars studying. And then you're left with a couple of questions on your own. Is why are they studying these particular facets? And what's the implications of radioactive fallout? And everybody on the planet should have this kind of knowledge, but they don't. The world could be so much easier and better, and the world could have a future without nuclear. And that's the biggest takeaway you're ever going to learn about nuclear, but you're not going to learn it conventionally, unfortunately. And we got a poll for everybody tonight also. Is the Fukushima 4 reactors and 8 nuclear fuel pools that melted down worse than the Chernobyl single small nuclear reactor that melted down? Which was a graphite reactor, was a brand new reactor. It had no fuel pools. So the official story is a little tiny reactor is worse than 4 massive reactors with 8 fuel pools. And that should terrify you that the industry has gotten away with that narrative. This is a picture that you'll see in the media a lot. All kinds of media will publish the picture. It's not a real picture. This is alleged the Chernobyl core. Does that look like tens of thousands of pounds? Of course it doesn't, right? And you can't stand up there. It's absurd. Certainly a camera wouldn't work, and a human couldn't survive 1,000 feet away from a part of the melted core. It simply doesn't work that way. But that's rolled out constantly to the unsuspecting, and the majority of people think that is Chernobyl's so-called elephant foot. Here's the original picture. And so they darken the picture up, and then they put them there. So I darken the picture up and put myself there. It's that simple. So when you see these pictures, think of how easy it is to put somebody there. That's me right there. And conventionally, the average person wouldn't know the difference, see? And so, transfer of radiocesium from soils and plants to reindeer. So what they're talking about is radioactive fallout. Radioactive fallout 1,000 miles away. And then the deer eats the plants and they get radiation in their body, right? That's what they're talking about. But what you got to remember is that every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. And every nuclear power plant is hemorrhaging radiation. And that radiation is transferred to the plants, and the plants are transferring it to the people who eat the food from these farms. And when every nuclear power plant worldwide, except for a few of them, are surrounded by farms, high productive farms, that's not an accident. And that's something that has to be addressed. And the industry's gotten away without any scrutiny for 80 years. 80 years and no scrutiny and no accountability. There is no checks and balances. There really isn't any checks and balances. I notice my pole is dead. What happened to my pole? What the hell? Let me restart the poll. How the hell did my poll just die? We had 19 votes. Well, all I can do is just restart the poll, I guess. That's the damnedest thing I've ever seen. Have we seen that maybe a year ago? The same thing happened. Let's try it again. You have to vote again, folks. My apologies. Is Fukushima 4 reactors and 8 nuclear fuel pool meltdowns worse than the Chernobyl single nuclear meltdown? And then there's only one answer. And it's the correct answer is absolutely positively yes. That's all my polls are yeses. Sheep farmers still stuck under a Chernobyl cloud. They closed 9,000, it's actually 9,430 plus farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. But when you look at the plume, the radioactive fallout, plume, that's just a partial model right there. To your left. And to your right, you see Chernobyl, all the helicopters. The majority of these helicopters were only used once. The tanks, this is just a partial graveyard of equipment from Chernobyl. Effects of radiation iodine on the thyroids of newborns and of rats in different stages, right? So like the industry likes to say they haven't studied the effects of radiation very much, but the reality of it is there must be tens of thousands of studies every single year for at least 80 years on the effects on humans and species. Changes in the blood in children living in areas polluted after the accident at Chernobyl. Like it's different than the typical pollution because it's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. And because you breathe this in, it's airborne also. It has many horrific attributes. Assessments of economic feasibility of short rotation crops on radioactive contaminated land in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. So what they're talking about is rotation crops to remove some of the radiation from those areas. And like the last, it's a nuclear wasteland, it's surrounded by nuclear wasteland. So the very last thing you want to do is grow food anywhere where there's nuclear radiation. And I mean, that's simple, isn't it? But why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? There's many reasons, right? And all of them are terrible reasons. One of the reasons is to slow down the bioaccumulation in the area, because all the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation. There's no containment, and the fuel rods are still splitting atoms. And so when you start seeing perpetual depictions of nuclear power plants, what's the first thing you're going to notice when you got aerial shots is that they're all surrounded by farms. And growing food in a nuclear wasteland and suggesting that rotating the crops somehow can clean the land up, again, right, is because the industry has no accountability. There's no incentive not to be evil. They can't clean it up because the entire country is covered in radioactive fallout. Blood indices in newborns and their mothers from the Belarus district contaminated with radionuclides from Chernobyl. So studies on the newborns and their mothers, studies on the fish in Greece after Chernobyl. And you see a lot of studies like this where they, far, far away, they're studying the berries, they're studying the fish, they're studying the birds, they're studying the mammals, the animals, the insects. Far, far away because it's contaminated and they can get funding to go study it. And it should be studied. But not by these people. These are terrible people. Transport of radioactive iodine-131, cesium-134, 137 from Chernobyl, and then using it in cheese and other cheese-making product. So why are they worried about that, but they're not worried about nuclear power plants that are surrounded by farms? Because that's a double-edged sword, right? And you should be worried about that they're not at least bit responsible with the radioactive fallout. Long-term study the transfer of cesium from Chernobyl contaminated soil to grain crops from radioactive fallout. So you're studying it from the radioactive fallout from a nuclear meltdown, but you're not studying it from the constant hemorrhaging at the nuclear power plants that are surrounded by farms. I mean, they don't need to study it. They know how this works. It's just easy money for them. Effects of long-term chronic exposure to radionuclides in plant populations. So they've studied so many facets, and all of the facets should terrify you. They know how this poisons you. They know this poisons you from 1,000 different ways. Transfers of 90 strontium into fish in the Finnish lakes. They're studying how the radiation transfers to the species. Cleanup of urban areas in countries contaminated by Chernobyl. Cleanup of urban areas in countries far, far away contaminated by Chernobyl fallout. It's just the whole story is mind-boggling. Like, really, wrap your mind around the statement. Cleanup of urban areas in countries contaminated by Chernobyl fallout. Do you clean up areas when your coal plant breaks down in different countries? Do you clean up different countries' urban areas when your gas plant breaks down? Do you clean up countries, urban areas in different countries worldwide when your coal plants, your oil plants, your gas plants break down? Of course not, Dan. It's stupid. What are you asking me for? So then why is there so many of these studies that we don't see these studies for gas, oil, and coal? All the studies are going to show you that you're never going to find a study because of a coal plant, an oil plant, or a gas plant. These plants shouldn't exist on your planet. This is not a game. And nobody on this planet is going to have that conversation with you. Not a single person is going to walk you through this. And to me, that's the most terrifying story I'm ever going to know. Is that every academic on the planet has sold you not only short, but sold you a deadly product. Reproductive functions of women subjected to radiation during the accident. Well, I mean, if you're cleaning up the urban areas of all these different countries, then everybody in those countries would have got contaminated, yeah? Because saying that they didn't is just lying to yourselves, right? Some aspects of mutation research is after low-dose radiation exposures. Why are you studying mutations with low-dose radiation when the governments in our countries with nuclear will tell you that no, there's no worry, there's no issues? But every one of these stories is another issue that's not addressed, and it is actually covered up. Evaluations of the brain functional disorders in Chernobyl patients. So mental health problems from radiation. Schizophrenia is one of them, but Down syndrome and autism are studies they'll first do immediately after nuclear accidents. We got some of that coming up for you. But yet they want to call it radiation phobia, right, to blame you. Complex approach to mental disorders after Chernobyl accident estimations. Radiocesium accumulation from Chernobyl fallout nestlings of flycatchers populations in Norway. Norway's far, far away from Chernobyl. It destroys the entire ecosystem. It breaks the food chain, and then you see, and it affects all species, including humans. Assessment and is devastating, and it's forever. Assessments of the influence of Chernobyl on birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. A study of hot particles collected in Sweden a year after Chernobyl. Hot particles in Sweden. The intellectual, developmental, and behavioral disorders in children from Belarus exposed in utero following the Chernobyl accident. Plutonium and other alpha emitters in bones of wild animals from northeastern Poland, which means if it's in the bones, it's mutating the stem cells. So, but this is really significant for every species, particularly in like insects and birds and mammals and small animals. It's devastating. And for children, of course, it's unbelievably brutal. It sets them up for a lifetime of misery. And the industry is well aware of all of it. When you see it, when you go through all these studies at night, that's what you're ended up, that's the takeaway, is there's no way they don't know what's going on. There's simply no way. There's no way. I'm not sure if it was the last anniversary or the Chernobyl anniversary before, but I've done 900 studies in a single show, just ran through it, so people can kind of comprehend how many facets this affects. And so if you got a pen and a paper, you sat there and you're watching this tonight, and you're just putting like a one for every different study, you're putting a stroke on a piece of paper. At the end of the night, when you count that, what you realize is this affects every facet of every species' life, and in the worst way possible. Influence of agricultural countermeasures. Like, how are you going to have a countermeasure? First off, every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. They don't do countermeasures there. They send it to the market as quick as they can to poison you and your loved ones. Like, this is such an evil industry, it's hard to comprehend that the entire world has not gotten to war against these people, these chicken necks, these strawmen, these cowards. These are cowards, by the way. The nuclear community is real-life cowards. I mean, they're cowards. They're literally the epitome of what a coward is. If you meet any one of them, you'll know right away this is a coward. The minute you meet him, you go like, this is a fucking coward. If a mugger, if he's got his wife and 2 kids there and a robber comes up, he's going to run away and leave them there. It's a coward. And everybody that knew that person, nuclear academic, nuclear scientist, everybody on the planet, nuclear scientists and academics, when they were growing up, everybody in the school, all their friends, all their neighbors knew they were fucking cowards. They were saying, that's going to be a bad fucking seed when that grows up. And they're the ones that got picked up at the university and put in the industry every single time. The industry was looking for those cowards that won't stand up to the industry and will participate in exterminating all the species. That's what you're dealing. You're dealing with a coward, 100% coward industry that hides behind science and doesn't have a single redeeming quality in their entire legacy. And the potential for disease initiation by inhaled beta-emitting nuclear particles. You don't need to inhale it if you're going to be eating at your supermarkets, and from every nuclear power plant is pumping out radioactive food. Everything within 100 miles of these disease factories is worse than Chernobyl fallout. Every friggin' one of them. Radiation contamination after Chernobyl nuclear accident and the effective dose received by the population of Croatia. The population. So if the entire population of Croatia, of a country, that they're admitting that they got irradiated, then every insect, every bird, every animal, every mammal, every species, all the biota, the fungus, the bacteria, everything got irradiated also, and that's permanent. All your drinking water is permanently irradiated. Because when you see a study like that, that's what they mean. Individual dose due to radioactivity accidentally released from fusion reactors, which don't exist, but it's going to be a tremendous amount of just tritium-3H alone. And tritium-3H is not what the pro-nuclear community is pumping it out lately to be. It's very nasty isotope. And it's on the bottom of the scale of isotopes that you're worried about, but you better be worried about it. And it's going to be a prolific amount from these disease factors. Seasonal variations in radiocesium concentrations. Now, we covered 12 of these stories last night, and we're just zipping through these right now. In wild ptarmigan and rock ptarmigan in central Norway after Chernobyl. So if it's in the ptarmigan likes to eat the berries and everything else, little insects, then they're bioaccumulating from that, see? Plus they're breathing it in. And when it starts having eggs, the eggs don't hatch. And over a few generations, there's no more left. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Legally induced abortions in Denmark. And there's a really good reason. And they were right to do that. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Why are you doing all these studies? Pregnancy outcomes in Sweden after Chernobyl. Why are you doing all these studies? The influence of post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. What are you doing all these studies for, sir? Chernobyl fallout and prenatal mortality in England and Wales, 3,000 kilometers away. Which, by the way, they closed 9,430 farms. Which meant you should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom, right? Incidences of illegal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Radioactive fallout and neural tube defects. Here's what some of it looks like. This is Chernobyl cases. Whenever you see any of these pictures, these are Chernobyl cases. And that, if you ask these kids what do they want, they would say like a radio or a TV because they're so bored. And the nuclear industry could give each one of them a radio or a TV, couldn't they? But they don't. And each nuclear industry in the local communities and cities will donate hundreds of thousands each year to the boys and girl clubs, don't they? But they won't donate anything to the victims, will they? It's a despicable fucking industry, and the people in it are despicable scumbags. The lowest forms of life is the pro-nuclear. Legally induced abortions in Denmark. You can see why. If not, let me remind you. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl. Why are you doing all these studies, sir? I like to have these people on trial and be pumping the questions to them. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. Why are you doing studies like that, sir? Ma'am? Because you know what's coming, right? It's such a despicable people in this industry. I don't know why anybody tolerates them. I don't fucking tolerate them. The people that hang out here don't tolerate them either. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Why are you doing all these studies? Oh, that's right. Because it's tangible, isn't it? The despicable scumbag industry. Early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. This is a study from Belarus, by the way. Belarus bemoans the drop in birth rates after Chernobyl. It dropped by 50%. Lucky them. Because if not, this is what they would have ended up with, isn't it? The kids are abandoned. Abandoned. And they're put in these homes where they have one nurse for every 40 children with severe retardation, autism, Down syndrome, congenital malformations. They have no one to love them. And it's even worse. They have people that can only abuse them to deal with them because they can't love them. Down syndrome in Scotland. Down syndrome in Belarus. Belarus is full of orphanages of children that have been abandoned, and including by the nuclear industry, who could have made their lives tolerable for them anyway. With a simple write-off. No, totally abandoned. Do you see a bunch of toys there on the floor? Do you see a bunch of comforts sitting on wooden fucking benches, for Christ's sakes? It's a despicable industry. Schizophrenia and left frontal temporal abnormalities in the aftermath of Chernobyl disaster. Trends in human sex odds at birth in Europe after Chernobyl. And the trends were more males than females. This is the study you'll see after all nuclear accidents, or nuclear dumps, or nuclear huge releases. And the releases they used to do in the 50s and 60s and 70s is so criminal it's hard to comprehend that the world sat in silence. And the only way the world can sit in silence is if all the universities and the media were complicit. And you've got more males than females, and that's what those studies are suggesting. Then what happens? You exterminate the species eventually. 3 million children require treatment because of Chernobyl, and many will die prematurely. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2000. 3 million children. This is a trust from the United Kingdom that goes down and helps the children once in a while when they can raise the money in Ukraine and Belarus. And these are the victims of Chernobyl. And bless their hearts for doing that, right? And that's not the nuclear industry is not funding them. I can tell you that much. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. And the nuclear industry would say, well, you didn't need to have the loss. Right? They go and try to, they make it even worse, where they come out and they denigrate any possibilities of the children getting any kind of help in the near future, because they say it didn't happen, when it absolutely, positively, 100% happened. And all these studies on it are there to cover it up for the most part. Secondary sex ratio and trends in associated gender-specific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. And what the studies show is more males than females from the radioactive fallout. All plants are hemorrhaging radiation. Once you start putting fuel rods in the fuel pools, there's no containment, it's still splitting atoms, and it's pounding radiation 24 hours a day into the local and the Earth's ecosystem and biosphere. It's despicable. It was ultimately the only outcome ultimately from the nuclear power industry is a genocide, an omnicide of all species. Eventually, there's so much radiation into the ecosystem, there is no way for the species to survive, and we have hit the tipping point. Fukushima was a pulse event, right? There was so much, we tipped the scale. And so when you look at all the abnormalities, weather patterns, the climate change, disgusting parasites, yeah, the climate change is real. It's 100% real. It's 80 years of emissions, radioactive plumes for 80 years, invisible snowstorms of radiation covering the entire planet, pulsing energy at the speed of light every fucking second. Carbon doesn't do that. You don't see no plumes covering the planet of carbon. Carbon makes insects and birds and mammals and animals and trees and fish and everything else and humans. No carbon means we're just like the moon, for goodness sakes. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth, a concise review of literature. Trends in birth and birth to sex ratios and vicinity of research reactors in Germany. Why are you doing studies like that for? Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximity of nuclear facilities in France. Why are you doing studies like that for? Global implication of Chernobyl. Your global implication, and you'll, by the time we get through this tonight, you're going to understand what a global implication. It's not a global implication, it's a global genocide, omnicide of the species. European research on the transfer of radio, and Chernobyl is a paper towel compared to Fukushima. Chernobyl is a paper towel compared to 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem 24 hours a day with no fucking containment. And it's not accidental, folks. It kills all the species. It kills the bacteria and the fungus in your forest, for goodness sakes. European research on the transfer of radionuclides to animals. The transfer of radionuclides to animals and insects and birds, humans, pollen. Uptake of cesium, of course, if there's an uptake of cesium, it's an uptake of uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and strontium and every other thing else, right? It can't just be cesium. You see the pilots to your left, every one of them died. Everybody you're looking at in that picture died shortly after that. Those helicopters to the right, by the way, a lot of them are only used one single time.
And you know well at Chernobyl, the helicopter pilots that came in and that deposited the heavy materials to try to put down that fire, which was a very different kind of event than what we're looking at now. But still, there were helicopters, and the pilots all died from radiation exposure.
It was heroism.
During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die. But their efforts only buy a few days. Although it has been covered over, the fire still isn't out.
The industry is insane.
And you know well that
the industry is actually insane. It's insane with hatred. It hates you. Because there's nothing else that fills in the checklist, is it? The fate of several radionuclides derived from atmospheric fallout in a river watershed. What are you studying that for? The effects of radiation on sperm swimming behavior dependent in barn swallows. There's around almost 1 million deaths worldwide calculated from Chernobyl. The official story, though, if you go to Wikipedia or United Nations, is 37, right? It's a disgusting industry. United Nations is despicable. It's despicable what they're doing. It's despicable. 238 plutonium, 239, 240 plutonium, 241 americium, which decays to 241 plutonium. 90 strontium, 137 cesium in soils around the Nuclear Research Center near Prague. All the animals died in all the studies for plutonium contamination, and they all died of 3 tumors: the lung, the liver, and the bones, the skeleton, rather. Transfers of radionuclides in animal production system. They know. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how evil this actually is. These people on the roof of Reactor 4 at Chernobyl, they would go out there for 30 seconds, and then they went home and got sick and eventually died from that exposure. And they're going out and picking up blocks of graphite from the explosion at Chernobyl and throwing it off the building and then running in and leaving the site. And there was tens and tens and tens of thousands of people that went through that process. And every one of them was entitled to a little tiny pension because they were no good for work ever again. And that you see the vest they're wearing, they're handmade vests. They made them themselves. They're lead sheets that they turned into vests. And when they passed it on to the next guy, he got an irradiated vest, right? Accumulation history radionuclides in like moss from southern Italy. So why are you doing all these studies? Solid cancers after therapeutic radiation. Can we predict which patients are most at risk? Well, yeah, the ones that are most at risk is the one you used radiation on. You fucking piece of shit. Excuse the language tonight. This stuff makes me incredibly upset. When the first person drops the block of graphite, the next one picks it up and runs with it. Congenital Abnormality Registry in Belarus, a tool for reassessing the public health impact of the Chernobyl accident. Congenital Abnormality Registry is a tool for assessing the public health impact of Chernobyl. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. Radiocesium in brown trout. I think this is Sweden, right? Yeah. They closed down the Sweden freshwater fishery for 30 years after Chernobyl. The average total cesium activity content rose to 7,000 atoms per kilogram when wet, and the activity content fell during 1987, and at icebreak in 1988 was 4,000 atoms per kilogram. However, they're only looking at cesium. They're not checking the other 1,000 isotopes, and the majority of them are going to be there in that sample. However, there was no further reduction during 1988 and 89. In other words, they probably faked the original reduction. Radiation-induced cardiac valve diseases in a man from Chernobyl. Long-term decline of cesium concentrations in honey in the second decade after Chernobyl. Long-term decline of cesium concentrations in honey. First off, you radiated all the bees' nests and you destroyed that whole genetic selection of bees, didn't you? Chernobyl radionuclides in shellfish. They studied every facet of it, and yet they're telling you they don't know. There's not many studies to quantify danger. Cesium-137 concentrations in reindeer and the fodder plants. 137 cesium, 239, 240 plutonium, 241 americium in the boreal forest soil and their transfers into wild mushrooms and berries. And wild mushrooms and berries are two things you don't want to be eating anymore. Unless the berries are grown indoors, you need to avoid them. They're incredibly, and mushrooms, they bioaccumulate radiation. It's catastrophic. And these are abandoned cities. How many cities do you know was abandoned because of coal plants, oil plants, and gas plants breaking down? Oh, that's right, none. Behavior of radionuclides in soil and crop systems. It's such a strange. These are such. Like they're studying the crops and soil following radioactive fallout, but they're not studying the farms surrounding nuclear power plants and nuclear weapon sites, nuclear dumps. Because they can get the money for that, no problem at all, but it's hard to get the money from that because nobody wants to touch that. Is it an accident that almost every single nuclear power plant worldwide is surrounded by farms, as far as you can see? Is that an accident? Is that a coincidence? Or is that on purpose? Is that genocide in that case then? If it's on purpose, is it genocide? Long-term behavior of plutonium in the air and disposition. Long-term behavior of plutonium in the air, airborne, that you breathe in, burns a hole through your lung, gets in your bone, in your skeleton, or in your liver or your lung. And then attacks your immune system until it builds a tumor around it. The role of resuspension. Remember, every time there's a forest fire, you're liberating massive amount of radiation back into the environment, no matter where it's to. The transfer of cesium from soils to plants. There's no way they can say that they don't know that having nuclear power plants surrounded by farms is a bad idea. There's no way. So therefore it's on purpose, right? Because what else fills in the check marks? Migration of fallout, cesium, plutonium, or plutonium, americium, cesium-137, and various horizons of a forest soil under pine. And what it does is it kills all the bacteria and fungus. We know that from these studies, say, for instance, around Chernobyl. It kills the bacteria and the fungus so the forest doesn't break down the foliage and the litter anymore. And so when you have forest fires, they're massive forest fires because everything is dry. You kill the ecosystem of the forest. So, because normally a forest is nice and wet and moist, and it has all this fungus and bacteria, which, by the way, trees and plants can't survive without fungus and bacteria, right? And so then it doesn't soak up water. So when you start having rain, now you have massive flash floods. And post-Fukushima, we're seeing flash floods all over the world. Post-Fukushima, we're seeing supercell cyclones, supercell typhoons, supercell hurricanes. You really think this is a coincidence? Migration of fallout 239, 240 to 41 americium, cesium, various horizons of forest soils. In vitro responses of leaf segments is affected by growing donor plants in radioactive soil. So to suggest that they don't know that growing food right alongside of nuclear power plants is genocide is insane. Right? It's crazy to suggest they don't know what they're doing. Quantitative assessments of the effects of agricultural practices designed to reduce the cesium and strontium soil plant transfer in meadows. It simply doesn't work. You can't, because like cesium acts like calcium. Like cesium and strontium assimilates right into your body. It tricks your body. It acts like everything else around it, but it's nothing like everything around it. It's hard for me to comprehend after all these years that nobody's having this conversation. In fact, it breaks my heart. It destroys my soul. (137) cesium in the Danish Wadden Sea contrasts between the tidal flats and salt marshes. They study everything, don't they? And they find out everything, and they know everything is bad. But yet, when they're put on the spot, they'll say, well, there's no studies to suggest this would have an adverse side effects on anything. But yet, when you look at what they studied, these are the worst creatures imaginable. The transfer of cesium from soil to plants and fungi in ecosystems. And so why are we only talking about cesium? Because that's the game they're playing on you. The more they talk about, then the more your brain starts going, oh shit. Estimating the emissions from a nuclear accident using observations of radioactivity with dispersion model products. Estimating the emissions from a nuclear accident. Radioactivity in food, and the total diet samples collected in selected settlements in the U.S. Soviet Union. Like, these are worse than Chernobyl's. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation up that skinny stack there, 24 hours a day. There's about 120,000 liters from each fuel pool. Each reactor needs 2 fuel pools. Worldwide, there's at least 1,000 fuel pools. That's not counting universities and national laboratories and covert secretive laboratories in different countries. So when you got 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day, Like, the word hemorrhaging doesn't even do it justice what we're talking about. Because the fuel, you take the fuel out of the reactor, and it's in the reactor, it's providing power for 1 million homes. That's amazing. It's amazing. But when you take it out, you're putting it into a pool where it's still producing those atoms, and there's no containment. Those atoms now are released into the environment. So every 24 hours, there's a plume covering your planet from 1,000 different sites. And each site is capable of a plume that will cover your planet over 20 days or so. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't pick it up, you can't throw rocks at it, you can't perceive it. But there's no way, you have no autoimmune defense trigger to defend against it. It treats it as a foreign object, it attacks it with white blood cells for the rest of your life. That's the cause and effect. And that's more than enough reason. And there ain't no biological weapons that has that particular attribute. And so the doctors in the 50s described it as a biological weapon because it was worse than biological weapons. The biological effects of ionizing radiation in crustaceans. If you look at my research expeditions, it's an extinction event for the Pacific Ocean. That's an extinction event. Lower variability of radionuclide activities in upland dairy products compared to soil and vegetation. Implications for environmental surveys. Implication for environmental survey. Lower variability of radionuclide activity in upland dairy products compared to soil and vegetation. Like, they studied every facet of this, and they lied about everything too. The Atlas of Cesium, when you see it with an A, that's a British study. Disposition on Europe after Chernobyl. Well, I mean, they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom, which meant all your fresh water there was permanently polluted. It meant your air was permanently polluted. It meant everybody was irradiated constantly. Low doses, but which brought on all kinds of health issues, lung problems, liver problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, massive amount of diabetes and Down syndrome and autism, Alzheimer's and dementia, schizophrenia, mental health issues, real mental health issues, not radiophobia, but actual tangible, severe, traumatizing mental health issues. Foliage absorption, leaf fruit transfer of cesium-137. But the minute you only include cesium-137 and you don't acknowledge the rest of the... And look, they even mentioned potassium-40. And you got to be some kind of evil to mention potassium-40, conflate them together with anthropogenic man-made radiation. Like, you're an evil scumbag to do something like that. So you're studying radioactive fallout absorptions and leaf fruit transfer in fruit trees, but you're not studying the radioactive fallout around nuclear power plants. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? Here we go again tonight. Chugging a lug of water. Mathematical models of cesium-137. Vertical migration of forest soil. Vertical migration, but why are we only talking about cesium-137? So all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And every couple of years you're adding more reactor fuel to the pool. So now there's even more radiation every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And a couple of years later you're adding more reactor cores to the fuel pools. And so now you're talking about massive amount. And so each decade is a hideous amount added into the fuel pools. All of that is splitting atoms. So when these reactors are 40 years old, 50 years old, the amount of radiation hemorrhaging out of there is catastrophic. It's countrywide. It's a biological weapon. It's a despicable industry, despicable people. They're despicable people. They're the worst of the worst. they're the most chicken-neck, coward, scum, genocidal, omnicidal, mass-murdering cowards you'll ever come across. They're truly freaks. Strontium-90 in the antlers of red deer, an indication of environmental contamination by strontium-90. Measurements on retention and transfer characteristics of radiocesium from poor quality upland soil to heather, from heather to sheep. They've studied every facet of it, and they know exactly what they're doing. But when they're put up in the media says, well, there's no evidence to suggest it's going to have any adverse effects on humans, let alone anything else. And the media could fact check that in a heartbeat, call them out on it, and that's not their job. Their job is to promote the lie. Radiation effects on wild terrestrial vertebrates. The EPIC collection. Apparent lack of radiation susceptibility among residents of high background radiation areas in Ramstar, Iran. Can we relax our standards? Well, the radiation they're talking about is not really radiation. It's natural radiation, something we're already acclimated to through genetic superior selection. It's the stuff that we're made of. It's stardust. Man-made radiation, though, is completely different. You can't conflate the both of them. And so the fact that they allowed that study to be published is despicable. And the fact that the study was produced, that was strictly produced to downplay the significance and the harmful effects of radiation in the first place. And we've heard that argument for decades now. And every time we hear it, we're able to counter it. But the average population has no concept and might even buy into it. And the people that are promoting it are the most vile scum imaginable. They're the lowest forms of life imaginable. They're the most hideous, odious, sadistic, maniacal, it really makes me upset, and I apologize. Apparent lack of radiation susceptibility, yeah? Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. You put 200 million becquerels, atoms. So think of an atom pulsing energy. That's a becquerel. It does that every second. So every second it pulses energy. That's considered a becquerel. But you can't have a becquerel without the atom. So when you see a becquerel, think of an atom. So 50 antipagetic man-made atoms, pulsing energy every second. But see, the word 50 sounds like a lot, right? But I can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but I can't see it. So trying to find 50, you're not going to smell it, you can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't taste it. And so when your children are eating it, by the way, that's children. 50 becquerels a kilogram in adults is irreversible lesions to their organs. And guess where that leads to? It's a disgusting industry. It's a despicable industry. It's just a maniacal, sadistic, omnicide industry. So when you put the same amount into a moose or a caribou or a bear or a raccoon or a fox or your pets, whatever the case may be, it's going to devastate their health, yeah? And because the way the effects play out, you don't notice it, but the animals are more lethargic. Their immune systems are more susceptible to pathogens and viruses. The transfer of silver 110 to sheep tissue. They've studied every facet, and they know having nuclear power plants surrounded by farms is literally evil. There's literally nothing more evil than that. There is no other industry that can hold a candle to what the nuclear industry does. In fact, if you took all the evil nuclear industries, if you take the 60,000 chemicals that are unregulated with no human and environmental impact studies whatsoever, they still don't hold a candle to the nuclear industry. The fuel pools at every nuclear power plant are perpetual disease factories. They're hemorrhaging massive plumes every 24 hours into the ecosystem, the biosphere. And it's not too late to stop. At some point, we're going to have to stop it. And the only way we're going to stop is if we have a conversation. The only way the world can have a conversation is if the people that are learning this today, You're the only ones that know this. It's up to you. It's your responsibility, your obligations, your obligations. Time dependency of the Cesium-137 contamination of wild boar from a region in southern Germany. Reviews of the Russian language studies on radionuclide behaviors in agricultural animals transfers to mussels. So if it does it from radioactive fallout from a single accident, what's it doing from perpetual emissions from nuclear power plants into the farmland surrounding them? It's perpetual. Once you take the fuel out of the reactor, it's splitting atoms for long past the human experience. Taking into account absorbed doses in tooth enamel due to internal irradiation of human bodies by radioactive cesium isotopes. Again, like, to only suggest that cesium is part of the equation is the epitome of insanity. A critical review of measures to reduce the radioactive doses from drinking water and consumption of freshwater foodstuff. To reduce radioactive doses from drinking water and consumption of freshwater foodstuff. Like, the only way to avoid radiation is to stop drinking, stop eating, and stop breathing, because they have contaminated the entire biosphere for 80 years. And it's gotten worse every year because they keep adding fuel to the pools. So it's even more. Every year it's more being released. And the original fuel never stops releasing. And so every time you put more fuel in the pool, you have a bigger snowstorm of radioactive fallout. And so they have these places surrounded by farms, and then they ship that food all over the country to poison people. It's unbelievable that this industry, and these farms are always right up to the boundaries of the nuclear power plant. And if you drive down the road with a camera and take a picture, their security with a high school education and a license to carry a gun will come out and challenge you. Because they don't want people with Geiger counters. They don't want people with cameras there, because 2 and 2 starts adding up in a hurry. Risk of radiation exposures to children and their mothers. They've studied every facet of this. Radioactivity in the air around nuclear facilities in Mexico. In the air. If it's in the air, then it's in the food. It's in the farms, right? Those small, see the small stacks? They're hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem from the fuel pools 24 hours a day. And every nuclear power plant has incinerators on top of that. They actually incinerate radioactive material. It's unbelievable. Gas, oil, and coal plants don't have incinerators. Radionuclide transfers to fruit in the International Atomic Energy Agency. And the International Atomic Energy Agency, all of these people should be in jail for the rest of their natural lives. They're the worst of the worst. They're literally the worst of the worst humans imaginable. And Raphael Grossi going around telling everybody nothing got out of Fukushima means the whole planet is corrupted. There's nobody challenged that assertion on me. It's terrifying. When you look at the buildings, there's no way that anything is left in the buildings. And to suggest that nothing got out is unconscionable. Ionizing radiation attracts soil fungi. Yeah, but eventually it kills the fungus, it kills the bacteria, which is the basis of the ecosystem. Radioactivity measurements of migrating birds captured in Spain. Long-term variations radionuclides in the Bratislava air, which is, I meant to look up where that was too, I can't remember. Analysts of radiation-induced thyroid cancers in humans. They've studied every facet of this. A model for radiological consequences of nuclear power plants' operational atmospheric releases. Well, the nuclear atmospheric releases, like the immediate fallout close by is going to get sucked up by the farms, right? And everything is landing in these forests eventually gets, when the wind blows, washes it into the farms. Radiocesium in caribou and reindeer in northern Canada, Alaska, and Greenland from 1958 to 2000. Uptake and accumulation of cesium-137 by upland grassland soil fungi, a potential pool of cesium. If cesium's there, uranium's there, plutonium's there, americium's there, strontium's there, everything else is there. I guess it's a coincidence that every nuclear power plant is surrounded by food. Persistence of 137 cesium in litter layers of forest soil horizons in Turkey. It's been studied and studied. So much is mind-numbing. 90 strontium, 137 cesium, 238, 239, 240 plutonium, 241 americium, distribution in alpine wetlands. Economic viability of short rotation crops for energy production for reuse of cesium contaminated land in Belarus. Well, the land is not just going to be cesium contamination. And this is something now that anybody who's heard regularly knows is incredible betrayal to suggest. See, cesium is a gamma emitter, by the way, and it emits around 600 feet pulses every second. 600 feet. So nobody is safe. No species is safe. It sterilizes forest. Like, the danger is palpable. It's so important that we deal with this. It's not sustainable. We can't have a future and nuclear power on our planet. Nuclear fuel on our planet. The fuel cycle is the most lethal creature in human history. It's perpetually hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem with no containment and no way to build a containment. Determination of the 243 curium, 244 curium, which needs lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium, by the way. Ratio alpha spectrometry in environmental samples exposed to discharges from nuclear fuel cycles. Well, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is the curium isotopes, which is a horrific isotope. Migrations of cesium in tributaries, lake water, and sediments in Italy and Switzerland. In comparison with other lakes, they've studied every facet of this. Distribution of artificial radionuclides in deep sediment of the Mediterranean Sea. Disorders in patients exposed to low-dose radiation. Like, patients don't get low-dose radiation. Patients get high-dose radiation. Impaired swimming behaviors of sperm from barn swallows. Well, that's going to be true. It means you're sterilizing all the species, doesn't it? Incidents of illegal abortions and congenital abnormalities in Hungary and everywhere surrounded by nuclear power plants. The people who eat those food ends up with the same thing. External gamma dose rates delivered from the Chernobyl fallout in Belarus. External gamma dose rates delivered from Chernobyl fallout. It can't be just gamma. It's got to be alphas and betas and neutrons and by proxy now X-rays. You can't have one without 1,000 other isotopes on top of it. Human bones obtained for routine joint replacement surgery as a tool for studies of plutonium, americium, and 90 strontium body burden in general public. Australia, after Maralinga, Montebello, after the British nuked Australia, the Australian government stole the bones from 25,000 children that had died prematurely to test them for radiation, to see if radiation killed them, but didn't tell the loved ones and the families. And that 100%, because they were just looking for strontium-90, 100% had strontium-90 in the bones, which meant they were mutating the stem cells of the babies, the young children. Down syndrome in Scotland, most likely from Donneray. Distribution of plutonium in fish from Glenks Bay. Resident times of fallout from plutoniums americium, cesium, in the upper horizon's undisturbed grassland soils. They've studied everything. This is Windscale, Sellafield. This is a weapon site surrounded by farms. It makes, this is a reprocessing site for nuclear fuel. And the process for making nuclear fuel is one of the most polluting industries imaginable. It's unbelievable. They have to liberate an exorbitant amount of radiation into the ecosystem to get their plutonium for weapons they can't use. So the amount they release is worse than the nuclear weapons would be. And it's an industry that is raking in money. And there's no oversight. There's no auditing. There's no checks and balances. And now you got generations of inbreeding. It's hard to comprehend, but almost 77 years, all the food coming from within 150 miles of this site is unbelievably radioactive. And then the ocean is right here, the Atlantic Ocean. There's actually 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the ocean from the mixed oxide fuel plant that melted down. How's the poll doing here? Let's bring up the poll. Is Fukushima 4 reactors and 8 nuclear fuel pool meltdowns worse than Chernobyl? Why would somebody say no, though? What kind of shit for fucking brains would say no? What kind of bird brain said no? What kind of dummy would say no to that? What kind of idiot would actually say no? What kind of useless fucking feeder would say no? Really, right? What kind of useless feeder would say no? So, there's 120,000 liters a day from each fuel pool. So there's 1,000. Let's say 1,000 fuel pools. So each day, there's 120 million liters. And each liter has got around, say, 6 trillion atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms. And like the numbers are so astronomical. This is each day released into the ecosystem for 50, 60 years. Like, it's so terrifying. It's so mortifying that this industry has gotten away with something like that for so long. It's literally terrifying. Schizophrenia in the aftermath of Chernobyl. Female reproduction in areas of radiation influenced after an accident at Chernobyl nuclear power station. They've done a study on so many facets, and these are all cherry-picked. I was looking for certain stories to go along with the farms, right? And radiocesium transfers to baby sheep fed contaminated hay after Chernobyl. And then they talk about using ammonia as a countermeasure. There is no countermeasure. It's absurd to suggest that there's such thing as a countermeasure. Weathering and radiocesium contamination on urban streets, walls, and roofs. So when your streets, walls, and roofs are contaminated, that means you need to run away. Don't look back. And take your pet with you, and as quick as you can get your pet shaved, because that's going to be completely contaminated. Reductions of external dose in a wet contaminated housing area in Russia. Molecular modifications of cholesterol metabolism in the liver and the brain after chronic contamination with cesium-137. So they're talking about everybody and every species on the planet. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Is the industry doing it because it's evil, or is it doing it by accident? Is it an accident, a coincidence, that every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms? Well, obviously it can't be. So then it's on purpose. Why do they hate us? Why do they hate the 8 million plus species? Post-Chernobyl radio monitoring of Ukraine forest ecosystem. Plutonium in locations of local sources and its involvement in global circulation. Natural antipagetic resuspension. Natural and antipagetic resuspension. So they're talking about natural and man-made isotopes. Right? So when you conflate them together, that means you're a piece of shit. That means you're a scumbag. That you're purposely trying to deceive people. Chernobyl, the real story. Cesium-137, 134 levels in soil in the tea plantation in Turkey. What are you studying that for? You're not doing studies around Windscale and Sellafield, rather, or around all the nuclear power plants worldwide. How come? Does the Fukushima accident significantly increase the nuclear footprint? I don't know, 30 million one-ton bags. Is that significant? Growing food right alongside of one-ton bags of radiation. Is that the definition of stupid or insane or just monsters? The fact that the food is banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima, doesn't that quantify that nuclear is stupid? Because if it doesn't, what the fuck does? I apologize. Sometimes I swear a lot. Absolutely. If you sat here and wallowed in this fucking excrement all day, every day like I do, you'd have days like this too. And if you don't, there's something fucking wrong with you. The influence of hot particles contaminated on its 19 strontium-137 cesium transfers to milk and on-time integrated ingestion doses. The conditions of the vegetative nervous system's Belarus children. I showed you those pictures earlier, didn't I? Discharges of 137 cesium, 19 strontium, by the Finnish rivers to the Baltic Sea. Because, like a lot of mountains, at the bottom of the mountains is a river. And so the radiation that washes down eventually gets into the river. The river is the path now to the ocean. The ocean, now there's tens of thousands of miles of rain clouds are picked up by the ocean every day and brought back into the countries and redistributed again, and this cycle goes on for millions and millions of years. The only outcome is the extermination of all species. The effects of the accident at the Chernobyl atomic energy plant on the outcome of pregnancy, and we showed it earlier verbatim, right? Soil and plant-based countermeasures reduce cesium strontium uptake by grasses in natural meadows. Soil and plant-based countermeasures. Well, again, right? You could what they done in Chernobyl. They picked up 3% of the land where they wanted people to move back to. They scratched up the surface and put it in 30 million one-ton bags. That was just 3% of the what they considered areas they wanted to be habitable. The other 97% recontaminates everything immediately, and that goes on forever. The pollen is radioactive. All the sewage is radioactive. All the sediment in the water filtration in the communities and the cities is too radioactive to get rid of. And the amounts we're talking about are unbelievable. Like 50,000 tons is not unusual for a city. That's too radioactive from the water filtration systems to get rid of because it's so radioactive. The garbage is too radioactive to get rid of. The sewage is too radioactive to get rid of. Like, The ashes from the incinerators is too radioactive to get rid of. Like those particular attributes says you're supposed to abandon that part of the country. And when you ban food from 14 prefectures, that means you're supposed to abandon that part of your country permanently. Because the water isn't fit to drink, the air is not fit to breathe. And when you look at every nuclear power plant and it's surrounded by farms, what do you think they're really up to? You think they're doing that because they like you? You think you're doing that because they're not monsters? What is it? There's an urgency here that is denied, and we're censored. You can see the censorship yourself. Look at the censorship in my videos. If I was wrapping shit on a stick, I'd have 30,000 fucking people here yucking it up, wouldn't I? And it's the same group over and over and over. They're on all the councils. They're part of UNSCLEAR. They're part of IRPA. They're part of United Nations. They're part of the ICRP. They're who are these people, right? Who are the radiation experts? It's the same people at the ICRP, is on UNSCLEAR, is on IRPA, is on the International Atomic Energy Agency. These are all the same. These are all United Nations, by the way. They're the same group, the same people. The same 100 gray-haired people. And they're setting the policies for your loved ones and your friends, your families, your communities, your schools. And they're the worst of the worst. These are degenerate scums. And we know that because we covered them all. I'm going to play the video for you. This is a short video. This is a short video from the National Press Club. I think it was in Washington. You got Kyle Vetter from Berkeley. You got Miles O'Brien, the one-armed bandit. You got the NRC lady there. You got Kathleen Higley at the podium there right now. And what's his face is missing from their Robert. Just hang on here. What's his name? Robert Gale. He's on his bathroom break, I guess. I'm gonna play that little video.
When I was trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented. The ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and IRPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. IRPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own US NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these will bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known. It's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees, so it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas. And that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP are on UNSCEAR, they're in ERPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the US organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people, a lot of gray-haired 100 people. And most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of ERPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club. And we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us. So,
And they all knew to lie on or laugh on cue, didn't they? Investigation of the concentrations of radionuclides in sewage sludge from a wastewater treatment plant. Radioactive levels in human muscle samples in Greece 1 year after Chernobyl. Statistical theory for diffusion of radionuclides in ground and subterranean water. They've studied everything, folks. They studied everything, and they understand is evil. They have no illusions, and yet they continue to do it. What does that mean? Lifetime accumulation of cesium and potassium-40. Why would you talk about potassium-40? Why would you put that into the equation unless you're trying to confuse people, see? They're the lowest forms of life, the people that do that. Measurements and comparisons of gamma radiation doses in a high and low cesium disposition area in Sweden. What about the betas? What about the alphas? What about the neutrons? What about the X-rays? 50 clinical aspects surgical treatment of post-Chernobyl children's and adolescent thyroid cancers. It used to be 1 in a million in Fukushima, now it's 13,646 out of 38,000, which is equal to 358,000 of a million when you scale it up, when it used to be 1 in a million. Of tumors that are 2 centimeters. It's like an adult's thyroid gland is 3 by 5 centimeters. A child's thyroid gland is very tiny, so a 2 centimeter tumor is a massive tumor. It also means their thyroid now is so saturated with radioactive isotopes that it's producing radioactive hormones only. And if your thyroid gland is that saturated, by the way, then your skeleton is saturated, which means producing nothing but radioactive stem cells also. And then when you look at how vulnerable insects and birds and mammals and animals actually are compared to a human, it's going to be 1,000-fold worse. It's an industry that you got no choice but to get rid of. You got no choice but to tackle it. You got no choice but to confront it. Long-term distribution and migration of cesium-137 to small lake ecosystem with organic rich catchments, a case study in southern Germany. Long-term distribution migration of 137 cesium small lake ecosystems with organic rich catchments. I already done that one, Dana. Hot particles in Chernobyl fallout in Finland. Fukushima radiation release no threat to health. Every time you see a new scientist study, it's going to be a lie. Every time. Again, Fukushima was a catastrophic event. You know, there's South Korea's out there, professor was out there saying it was equal to 3 grams of sugar. And then, like the Mayo Clinic, the National Cancer Institutes, all the major shakers and movers are ran by people like Kathleen Higley I played for you earlier. The worst humans imaginable. The worst. And because there's no accountability, they don't feel the pressure not to lie. They don't feel the stress not to lie. Fukushima Reactor 3, Fukushima Reactor 4. So there was no health issues, but the buildings don't even exist anymore. And so we just went through a ridiculous amount of studies on Chernobyl. And Chernobyl is nothing compared to Fukushima, but Chernobyl was brutal. But yet it's nothing compared to Fukushima, the inventories. And suggest that there's no health effects from Fukushima. What was the date on that study? The 19th of March, 2011. So they came out with a study 3 days after the 4th reactor and the 8th fuel pool detonated and the inventories were completely lost, and said there would be no threat to the health. What kind of friggin' monster is that? And how do you get a study peer-reviewed that quick? Because you don't, obviously. The role of rivers in Chernobyl radio cesium delivery, distribution, accumulation in coastal sediments of the northern Adriatic Sea. Well, it can't just be cesium. There's got to be the 1,000 other fission products. It can't just be one. And that's the idea of the study, right, is to manipulate you. The effects of radioactive pollution on the dynamites of infectious disease and wildlife, because it compromises their immune system. They become more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. 90 strontium-137 cesium in the Black Sea after Chernobyl. Inventories, balance, and tracer applications. Well, when a meltdown occurs, you're consuming steel and rebar and water and rocks and everything else, cement and wiring, and all that is atomized in aerosol and ionized and radiated, and that's inventory too, see? Reactive transport, so like if you burn a pound of uranium and you burn 1,000 pounds of cement and steel and rebar and water and everything else, that's the animosity equivalent though, see? It's still radioactive fission particles. Reactive transport of 85 strontium in Chernobyl sand column. Statistic in dynamite experiments and modelings. They studied every facet of radiation. And yet they have the arrogance, the unbelievable hubris to suggest that there's no studies to quantify that there's a danger. Lesions in children born of the year of the catastrophe in Chernobyl. 239, 240 plutonium in the atmosphere in Croatia. Chernobyl health effects, radiation or stress. And think about the low life you got to be to suggest that is stress. To even put that into an equation. When 50 atoms per kilogram is going to cause irreversible heart damage to children. So imagine what kind of monster you are that you want to cover that up. That you make your living by covering up the harm to millions and millions of children. Imagine the mentality of those people, though. Imagine how dangerous they really are in real life. And sometimes we'll do polls, should nuclear scientists have their children taken away? Because obviously they're monsters, right? These are monsters. Anybody done a poll or a study like that is obviously a monster. If they got children, obviously the children should be taken away from them. Seasonal variations of cesium-137 activities in northwest Italy after Chernobyl. Freshwater fish in Finland, cesium-137. Inflammatory responses in rats chronically exposed to cesium-137. 137 cesium contamination T in yerba mate in South America. Conventional kidney cell cancers in patients with radiation exposures following Chernobyl and a comparison with the Spanish cases. Urinary bladder cancer in humans after Chernobyl. Non-psychotic mental disorders related to Chernobyl. Here's one of them right there, look. For a green New America. This piece of shit. Cancer in Sweden derived from fallout after Chernobyl. Yeah, no, nuclear is completely harmless, Dana. Plutonium and other alpha emitters in mushrooms from Poland, Spain, Ukraine. 90 strontium and certain other mushrooms consumed in Europe and China. You can't eat mushrooms without getting radiated now. They're one of the biggest aggregators of radiation. The transfers of Cesium-137 and strontium-90 from soil to food crops after Chernobyl, but no studies on radioactive fallout from nuclear power plants into the farms that surround them. How come? All these studies on fallout in food, but all of them are downplayed, by the way, except for a very few. Effectiveness of countermeasures applied in Belarus to produce milk and meat with acceptable levels. Acceptable levels. There is no acceptable levels of anthropogenic man-made radiation. And when they only talk about cesium, then these people should be lined up and shot. Yeah, they should be tried legally in court, because that's the way we have to do things. Not because it's the right, but it's because the way we have to do things. But these people should literally, all of them should be lined up and just fucking shot. They're the epitome of degenerate monsters. So you put countermeasures. There is no countermeasures. There is no countermeasures. What the fuck are you talking about? Right, it's meant to lull you into complacency. Atmospheric transport of radioactive debris to Norway in case of a hypothetical accident related to the recovery of the Russian submarine K-27. Now, I can't remember which submarine that Norway and Russia went, and the subway was scuttled by the Soviet Union. And it was sunk up in the Arctic. It was being towed, and then it sank, they said, right? But it was actually scuttled. It came out. Anyway, they said that the hull wouldn't breach for at least 1,000 years. But if you look at any shipwreck on the ocean floor, they rust incredibly quick, unbelievably quick, because of this phenomenon known as electrolysis. So, a typical boat, for instance, you're going to put zinc around the motors and around for the electronics, right? So you don't rust you don't degrade everything on the boat. But just because the boat is sunk doesn't mean you don't, the salt water itself is conductive, very conductive, electrolysis-wise. So it's going to break down submarines, which are steel, and ships and everything else. And the effects are dramatic and quickly, too. A dynamite model of 137 cesium accumulation by fish of different age classes. They studied every facet. It's almost impossible for an average person to comprehend this kind of evil. It really is. Bladder lesions induced by persistent long-term low-dose ionizing radiation in humans. Application solid-state nuclear track detector method for determination of size alpha activities of hot particles of Chernobyl fuel releases. Everything is a hot particle from a nuclear meltdown, by the way. Cancer of the maximilia, which is is it your jawbone or your upper? I think it's your jawbone. It's where the teeth are sunk into your bones, is what they're talking about. 5 years following Chernobyl, cancer. Where your tooth sockets. That's what they're talking about right there. Long-term genetic effects of radiation exposure. They don't know nothing about it, though. Just ask any nuclear scientist. Strontium-90 activity monthly milk samples from Greece. It's a fucking horrible industry, and I apologize tonight because I swear in quite a bit tonight, which is not normal, but it's not unnormal, because this industry drives you nuts sometimes. DNA damage evaluated by alkaline single cell in children of Chernobyl 10 years after the disaster. Agricultural countermeasures taken in the Chernobyl region. They don't have any agricultural countermeasures around the nuclear power plants worldwide that are all surrounded by farms or poison you every time you go to the supermarket. Effects of radioactive fallout on soil animal populations in the 30-kilometer zone of Chernobyl. Well, it destroyed the soil, the whole ecosystem. The soil doesn't, like the litter doesn't break down anymore. There's no ecosystem. The variability of Chernobyl cesium retention in the water column of lakes in the English Lake District 2 years and 4 years after disposition. They're talking about the United Kingdom, I believe. Cycling of plutonium, strontium, cesium, and other long-living radionuclides in forest ecosystems. They studied everything. And this is just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent that I got. Transport of iodine-131 through the grass cow milk pathway to northeast U.S. dairies following Chernobyl. Plutoniums, strontium, rubidium, cesium concentrations in surface air in Austria due to dispersion of Chernobyl releases over Europe. And why would you put 103 rubidium in that for? Contamination of food in Czechoslovakia by cesium radioisotopes from the Chernobyl. Contamination of food in Czechoslovakia. But nuclear power plants, the food around, the farms around them is perfectly fine. Of course it's not. It's lethal. It's a genocide, and the fallout is an omnicide. Radionuclides concentrations in the air and their dispositions in northwest Italy following Chernobyl. And Chernobyl was a paper towel compared to Fukushima. But look how bad Chernobyl is. Chernobyl fallout, this one cracks me up. Chernobyl fallout in Shakespeare Bay. Shakespeare Bay is where they were doing, the military, the American military, this is in the United States, Shakespeare Bay. United States was firing depleted uranium munitions in practice rounds in Shakespeare Bay. And so to cover up the radiation, they're blaming it on Chernobyl fallout. Yeah, Chernobyl went there, but the majority of the radiation in Shakespeare Bay is from the depleted uranium, the DULRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material, which has gone through a chain reaction and is pyrophoric. So it catches fire as it's going through the air and releases all kinds of isotopes. Radiation-induced impacts on the degradation of 2,4-D and the microbial population in soil microorganisms. In other words, like the population, the microorganism population in the soil is the very basis of the ecosystem, right? That without that, the roots can't survive of trees and plants and crops and everything else. And radiation penetrates all of that, pulses energy every second until it destroys it. Contamination of Austrian soil with cesium-137. Well, don't forget, it can't be cesium-137. It got to be uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, and everything else. Why are nuclear plants surrounded by farms? Everybody should wear a shirt. Why are nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Why do we hate each other? Why does the nuclear industry hate us? Cesium, when you do it with an A, that's the English, the United Kingdom, British terminology. And the British nuclear industry is a piece of shit. They're the worst pieces of shit imaginable. They're the lowest forms of life in the nuclear industry, by the way. Cesium-137 and perch in Swedish lakes after Chernobyl. Again, they closed the Swedish lakes for 30 years to freshwater fishing because of Chernobyl. Depth of migration in Chernobyl originated 137 cesium, 90 strontium in soils of Belarus. And like Ukraine and Belarus area, They're the biggest producer of grain. Grain is used for many, many things, including alcohol, for instance. But it's used for many subsidy foods. And third world countries that are having famine, this is where they're shipping all the food from, is these nuclear wastelands. You got any idea how sadistic that actually is? How demented this industry actually is? And it's been doing it for so long, that's the norm. And we have to break that norm. It's simply not tolerable. Chernobyl fallout in Finland, hot areas in Finland from Chernobyl. Imagine what Fukushima done to Canada, United States, for Christ's sakes. Excuse the language. Long-term variations of post-Chernobyl strontium, cesium, plutoniums, concentrations in the air, dispositions, radioactive fallout to the ground, resuspension, liberated back into the environment through convection, evaporation, through forest fires, and resuspension rates in southern Germany. Thyroid radiation doses in Britain are rising from Chernobyl. But Britain's had massive releases, never stopped releases from all of their nuclear power magnets, or their nuclear power plants and their reprocessing facilities like the Donneray in Scotland or Sellafield in the United Kingdom. These are unbelievable releases. It's just a stupid, a hateful, degenerate, genocidal, omnicidal industries at the worst degree. The most urgent thing in the world is to stop nuclear power plants and deal with that fuel. You've got to come up with a solution. Whether you like to or not, it has to be done, and it has to be done now. We have no time left for games. The entire world should be slapping these fuckers in the face all day. Transfer radio cesium via reindeer meet demand. It can't just be cesium. It's got to be uranium, got to be plutonium, got to be curium, got to be all the other isotopes. It can't just be cesium. Despicable that they do only these studies on, 90% of the studies or more are just on gamma. Effects of countermeasures applied in Sweden. The whole country should have been abandoned. All of these countries that we're covering should have been abandoned because of Chernobyl. You should have abandoned the United States and Canada. All the drinking water is completely contaminated. It's a fucking piece of shit industry that destroyed everybody's future and destroyed the health of everybody and every species. Uptake of radionuclides by plants after Chernobyl. Uptake of radionuclides by plants. But yet, all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. So how come we're not worried about that? And you better get worried about that. You need to worry about that. This is not a game. Changes in thyroid cancer incidences in Scotland post-Chernobyl. Radiocesium aquatic invertebrates from Norway after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. Why are you doing studies like that? You don't do that for coal. You don't do it for oil. You don't do it for gas plants. The propagation of Chernobyl iodine impulse through the airgrass animal milk pathway in northwestern Greece. And see, by using iodine 131, that's how you downplay the living shit out of what really happened, right? Every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms except for a couple. Every nuclear weapon site is surrounded by farms except for none. Every nuclear dump is surrounded by nuclear power by farms except for none. Why do you think they're doing that? Doesn't it seem, is there a possibility that they're purposely trying to destroy everybody in the 8 million species and permanently destroy them too? Low doses, non-targeted effects, environmental radiation protections. Where we are now and where should we go? Well, we should start off by hanging everybody in the nuclear industry and then start fresh and figure out how to clean it up. People say, oh no, we gotta use nuclear industry to clean it up. No, they gotta pay. They need to pay for what they got done so the next generation doesn't fucking do that again. Radioactivity in breast milk after Chernobyl. Vertical distribution of cesium activity concentrations in marine sediment, Western Greece. Transport of iodine-131 cesium from air to cow's milk produced in northwestern Italian farms following Chernobyl. Determination of cesium water system in the pre-alpine lakes. Thyroid radiation doses in Britain arising from Chernobyl. At Sellafield and every nuclear power plant. Practical improvements of the radiological quality of milk produced by peasant farmers in the territories of Belarus contaminated by Chernobyl. Air radionuclide patterns observed in Monaco from Chernobyl. The uptake by vegetation of Chernobyl and aged radiocesium upland West Crumbia, which is right alongside a nuclear weapons facility surrounded by farms, for Christ's sakes. Excuse the language. But we're not going to worry about nuclear power plants hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day from the fuel pools. You got any idea how big of a mistake this actually is? On the transport of Chernobyl radioactivity to eastern Canada. Countermeasures used in Ukraine to produce forage and animal food products with radionuclide levels below intervention limits. Well, it doesn't work that way. You can't stop the plants from uptaking radiation. It simply doesn't work. It's a complete fable. And why would you grow food in a nuclear wasteland, you piece of shit? Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms, you disgusting monsters? That's the question everybody needs to ask every nuclear scientist the minute you see them. You need to get in their face and ask them. Because they're getting away with it, and then they just do worse. Because there's no accountability. There's no incentive not to be maniacally and sadistic evil. Transgenerational genomic instability in children of radiated parents as a result of Chernobyl. Simulations of Chernobyl radioactive cloud over Europe using the EURAD models. Radionuclide contaminations of food imported into Iraq. Because they ship the radioactive food all over the world, see? They don't stop growing it. They fucking hate you. They don't care about you. Chernobyl lessons for psychiatrists. More scumbags, I'm sure. Transfer of Chernobyl-derived cesiums, iodines, from flowers to honey and pollen. And you know this is a pollen environment, right? Destroys the genetics of the pollinators on top of that. Investigation of food contamination since the Chernobyl fallout in Austria. But you're not doing an investigation of the fallout around nuclear power plants from the fuel pools. Is mind-numbingly stupid. Agricultural recovery of a formerly radioactive area. Characterizations of flaxseed development in a remediated Chernobyl area. You can't remediate any area. You're surrounded by nuclear fallout. You can't just clean up a little section. You can't remediate it. Look at all the scumbags signed their names to it. Transfers of radioactive fallout in sensitive agricultural environments after Chernobyl fallout in Sweden. Agricultural sensitive agriculture environments, sensitive agricultural environments. These are not. Nuclear power plants surrounded by farms, not a sensitive agricultural environment, really. Residual nuclear Chernobyl fallout and Sellafield pollutant. No, Sellafield fallout. How can you call one fallout and not call the other one fallout? How does that work? How does that actually work, Longworth? McKinnon? Found on the Isles of Man. Ingestion of Chernobyl cesium in Akita City, Japan, 1990. Well, they're not worried about that anymore. It's a scumbag industry, isn't it? Applications of potassium chloride to the Chernobyl contaminated lakes. So they're alleging that by putting potassium chloride in the lakes, they mitigated the radiation in the lakes. Try wrapping your mind around that statement, that madness. Like the criminal madness that they're talking about. Inflow of Chernobyl 90 to the Black Sea from the Dnepr River. Soybean thrives despite Chernobyl. Just because it thrives don't mean it doesn't poison everybody that eats it, you morons. Everything around a nuclear power plant, all those farms, they're poisoning everybody that eats it. Plankton as an indicator of temporal variations of Chernobyl fallout. Plankton. Because you've seen all the whales that are emaciated. The majority of them originally were the plankton eaters. And so you're talking 12,000 gray whales in the last 5 or 6 years was emaciated and died. These are astronomical numbers. Now they admit there's 7,000 humpback whales that died, and they're dependent upon the species that eat the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. There was also 1,000 culvert beak whales that washed up in just a single 1 year in the United Kingdom, different stages of decomposition. Which means that's 10% that you're going to find at best, which means there's at least 10,000 culvert beak whales died off at the same time. The whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand, for instance. The radioactive fallout, 1 million atoms per square meter over the west coast after the reactors exploded in Japan. 20 million particles. Each particle is vicious. Of iodine 131. 220 million atoms per liter of iodine 129 in the rain. This plume model is only based upon, let me move ahead, 15 days after the tsunami. 10 days after, let me move ahead, 10 days after the last reactor blew up and the fuel pools. Plume covers the entire planet. But if you let the plume model go on, we launched research expeditions because we're not here to play games. This is not a game. And so we've launched research expeditions for years and years and years. And we're gearing up to start again. And we've done from Vancouver, British Columbia, all the way to Alaska, year after year after year after year. And what we discovered is terrifying. We discovered that the species are actually exterminated. The species to your left are permanently now gone. They're gone due to Fukushima. It was a pulse event. 4 reactor cores and 8 fuel pools lost their entire inventories. The wind blows across the Pacific to North America, and it hits the mountains and washes back down to the coastlines. A large percentage of it. And these species are exposed twice a day. They were exterminated. The species now are exterminated. The species to the right are post-Fukushima. The species to the left are 2011, 2010, and before, right? This was 100% beautiful, wonderful, unbelievable, unimaginable healthy coastline pre-Fukushima. And post-Fukushima is an extinction level event. Because we went back year after year, the species didn't recover. I know somebody left a comment there the other day that someone found a couple of starfish on a beach, so therefore they're recovering. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? The species are completely gone. That's what it should look like everywhere. Radiation covered the whole country right away, 19 days in that model. This model is 20 days. This model is 20 days also, based on TEPCO's number. France's study was 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. These are catastrophic numbers. Norwegian Institute for Air Research for 20-day model radioactive fallout. The species never had a chance. Nobody has a chance, right? But the species are much more vulnerable. There's 30,000 insects at the high tide line also that were wiped out. And they're wiped out. They're exterminated. And when you go into the forest at high tide, there's not much research you can do on any birds and stuff like that. But there is no birds left out there. In 4 months to 5 months, we would count an average maybe of 3,000 birds. And the majority of those were seagulls close to a community, to fish plants and that. They're wiped out. They're wiped out because the plume covered the planet in about 30 days. And these reactors ejected reactor cores and fuel pools right out of some of the buildings. And the other ones, they burnt constantly for days. This is an extinction event. And it's time to stand up for the species and for your future. Because nobody else is going to do it for you. Look. And so you need to make a stand. And the most sickening thing imaginable is this is just a fraction of the media pretending they're in the fuel pool of the building to the left. It's not bad enough all the academics cut your fucking throat. The media are just happy to do it. They take great pride in destroying your life and your future and your loved ones' future. They take great pride in doing it. It's fun for them. And so when you see all these studies and you see that they studied every facet of nuclear, you're only left with one conclusion, that these are monsters. They got no human attributes whatsoever. They're actually monsters. And we know that because not a single academic on the entire fucking planet come out and challenge their assertion that they're in the fuel pool. What does that tell us? Not a single university came out and challenged their narrative that they were in the fuel pool of a building that don't even exist. It doesn't exist. And the media is doing that. Do you get any idea how reckless it is and what kind of chance they're taking? Imagine if that went viral. Talk about fake news, my goodness. The reason they're doing it is because it's an extinction event. And when they were doing that, I was on the ocean doing the research. How do we do anyway? I know, they got a little thing. I'm only allowed so many views per hour. I'm only allowed so many views every 12 hours. I'm only allowed so many views every 24 hours. I'm only allowed so many likes every 24 hours. That's it. And you just got me set on autopilot. That's what they got done to me, right? And I'm going to have to get off YouTube because YouTube's got me censored to the point where, I mean, I've still got to put it up on YouTube, but we got to get on other sites. We don't have anybody helping me. Nobody's reposting my videos. It's just like if you go out and you got all the fake scumbags, those videos get reposted everywhere. It's unbelievable. It's heartbreaking. So John B. and Kevin G. donated $25 each. Thank you, guys. You're awesome. I apologize because I get really cranky, I notice, when I do these videos. Putting them together drives me nuts because of all the lies. And when you do all these studies, you're talking about all these academics cutting your throat. And I would love to do a whole show or even a 1-minute video on academics that are trying to help you and warn you. But I can't even do a 1 fucking minute video because I can't find anybody out there. So it's like, it's mind-numbing. Yeah, over the years, over the decades, there's been a handful of people that have spoken out. But that's it. It's just a handful. And they avoided the most important facets of the story. It still irks me what Ernie Gunnison, Helen Caldicott, and Christopher Busby done to humanity for the first number of years. It irks me constantly what they done, how they lied, manipulated, and that YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and everybody promoted them. And I was even kicked off radio shows, like I was supposed to get on radio shows. And when it was come time for me to be on the show, no one called me, and who was on the show? It was Ernie Gunderson or Helen Caldicott or Christopher Busby. It was really something for a number of years how that played out. But I've done over 600 radio interviews, especially during the research expeditions. Every time I came ashore to get fuel and groceries, because you were traveling for 4 or 5 months at a time, right? And so as soon as you got back in cell phone range and you got on check your email, you had all kinds of requests for interviews. And so you spent the entire time you could doing interviews. It was really something. But slowly but surely the attention waned, and you're gone on the ocean for long periods of time. And we had to do the research because we had to find out whether the species came back. You originally had to find out if there was any damage when it was a total extinction event. Then you had to go back year after year to quantify in the hopes that you would find an oasis or that the species might recover. But after 5 more years, so 6 years after the 5th year after the original expeditions, then it's pointless, right? It's an extermination event. And these are permanent because it's radiation. Gas, oil, and coal breaks down. It doesn't exterminate all the species on the planet and poison everybody and destroy the health of everybody. And the nuclear industry, with the help of the media, has done everything to make sure you can't have a future. And so it's heartbreaking, but let's deal with it, right? Let's not hide away from the facts. That's how I see it. And so I'm here constantly trying to do the moral and ethical thing and educate the population in increments, particularly the policymakers and the investors, because they're going to seek these videos out. And so it's not going to register, you're not going to find them, but they're out there watching. And because they've been filled up with propaganda, once they come and find me, then it's game over for the nuclear. Is Fukushima 4 reactors and 8 nuclear fuel pool meltdowns worse than Chernobyl's single meltdown? Of course it is. Chernobyl was a graphite. These are pure uranium, pure plutonium. The comparison is 100 to 1 for each reactor core. So each fuel pool is full of probably 4 or 5 reactor cores at Fukushima. There's 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. There's 4 buildings that melted down, and 8 fuel pools. So it's equal to about 4,000 Chernobyls. And look how bad Chernobyl was. I just took you through several hundred studies that quantifies that assertion, right? So we got 36 thumbs up, 45 votes. Thank you, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Now, the original poll had 20 votes, so we got 65 votes, is it? On the poll tonight? Because the original poll got taken down. Right, that was the original poll, had 19 votes. 19 votes. And now we have 45 votes. That's 64 votes, is it? Or 45, 55, 59. That's 59 votes, rather. Dana, brain dead. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Hugs for everybody. My apologies again for swearing and cursing and freaking. You should have seen me earlier. I was much worse. I got up most of it out of me this morning. I was out working in shed today, starting to organize everything because I got rid of another bag of garbage from the work shed. So we're getting ready. This summer we're planning on doing a lot of research. We're going to try to start this week. We got to get the batteries in the boat sometime this week, and then we're good to go. Everything else is good. Okay, well, did we make it past the 2-hour mark? I was stalling to make it past 2 hours and 5 minutes. Okay, let's give it up. Thanks for everybody. Make sure you give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. And we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. If you're anti-nuclear, you're a friend of mine. Take care, folks. Have a great night.